All right, what is going on, fellas? Today we have the next installation into the Training Concepts series slash playlists. And to me, this is the best series I have here on this channel, kind of the best playlist. I think some of my better videos have gone into this so far, so I've kept my standards pretty high for what I felt would be like the next training concept I wanted to touch on. And these aren't in any logical order of importance. It's more just logical order of what I think is interesting stuff to talk about and what probably most of you already know. I'm not really going to make a training concepts explaining why specificity is important. I'm probably not going to make that one. But today I did have something that I wanted to talk to you guys about, as it's something that seems to be talked about but not necessarily understood. You'll hear often people will bring up the point, hey, when you're watching that advanced lifter that you look up to, what they are doing now is not necessarily what got them there. And so we shouldn't necessarily just copy their training where they're at now for a myriad of reasons. Obviously, their leverages are different than yours. Your technique is different. The tonnage they're moving is different. They're probably on drugs. You may not be. There's a whole host of reasons why we might not want to copy their programming verbatim because it's highly individualized to them. As someone gets more and more advanced, that's when their program starts to look a little bit more unique to them. Whereas I think that for the vast majority of people, for the first couple of years of training, they're going to respond pretty similarly to a pretty similar program. And as you get more advanced, that might need to bifurcate off into little offshoots that are individual to you. This advanced lifter, their program is pretty hyper specialized at that point. But people will often say, well, hey, what they're doing now is not what they did to get there. But I don't hear much discussion past that of, okay, well, how do we contextualize that? What do we speculate their training was like in the past? What does that mean? And this all kind of comes back to this idea of minimum specificity required. This kind of central concept that we should probably keep an eye on in our training as our training career progresses. We should probably have this in the back of our mind that as we get more advanced, the minimum specificity required to get better is going to go up. I have a little graph here. Plotted on the y-axis is specificity. The other is going to be training age. Now, the training age is a little bit dicey because there are some people that have been going to the gym for 10 years but have been doing it very badly. And I don't necessarily think they're that advanced. And the problem isn't necessarily that their specificity needs to rise. It's more a matter of the fact that they're not eating and sleeping or training hard. So we could probably say we could use training age, assuming it's good, solid, dedicated training towards a goal, or we could say like level of advancedness, though that'd be harder to quantify. So we can go training age on the x-axis and specificity on the y-axis. Now, how do we kind of gauge our specificity? We could say, well, part of specificity is maybe the number of times per week we're challenging the specific task we want to get better at. So whether that be something more like sports performance oriented, whether that be a specific lift that we want to get strong at, we could say, okay, well, frequency might factor into this, but the two ways you might look at it more numerically outside of frequency is what percentage of our total training tonnage is done on the main objective or main objective and its close variations, or what percentage of our training time is spent on that main lift we're trying to get better. So put really simply, someone early in their training career might come in and they might spend about 20% of their workout bench pressing. And then they've got a bunch of other exercises that comprise the other 80% of their training. So only 20% of the time in the gym is spent on the specific lift they're trying to increase, and this might not be a bad thing. This is a well-documented phenomenon in sports performance that early in a young athlete's career, it's probably better not to have them hyper-specialize early. We should probably have them play a wide variety of sports, develop these more general physical qualities, develop better proprioceptive awareness across a wide variety of tasks, and then ramp that specificity up with time. The same thing could be applied to us lifting. When we first start, we could spend 20% of our workout doing the bench press, 20% doing some HIIT cardio, and then maybe 20% doing some plyos, and then fill the remaining 40% with like varied bodybuilding movements, trying to build up our body from a variety of angles, develop this ability to contract different muscles, develop bodily awareness in these different planes, and get just better at the skill of lifting weights. So our specificity is very low, and because we're new, we're going to get better. As we get a little bit more advanced, we might need to move from 20% of our time in the gym to 30% of the time in the gym is actually spent on that main lift and its close variations. And to me, I think we should try to roughly follow this curve. Now, this curve is not going to be a straight line. It's going to look more like a stock, where it's going to be up and down and up and down. Especially if you're competing, there's going to be periods leading up to a preparation where our specificity is going to rise, and then away from competition, it's going to come down a little bit. But the average specificity is probably going to need to rise with time. And I would say that if we are significantly away from this line, and the exact numbers are completely made up, please ignore those. But if conceptually we're way up here early in our training career, where we've got mega high specificity before it's needed, we're probably not going to effectively develop all of the varied physical attributes we want. We're not going to build the base, for lack of a more complex, nuanced way of saying it. We're not going to develop our body in this more generalized way to then apply and ramp up the specificity. And you will often see this with powerlifters that specialize into a large arch bench press early. The problem being, a large arch bench press is not a very good developmental movement. So they're plugging in all of this highly specific volume at a high frequency, spending lots of their time doing these comp bench setups, and they're not going to be developing the first and foremost thing they need, which is going to be the cross-sectional area of the primary movers, because this movement itself is gotten so efficient to perform in competition that it's not the best use of time hypertrophically. And they would actually get outperformed. Like you'll often actually, you can go to a lot of powerlifting gyms and see this. You can see a guy who's about 2 years into his powerlifting and he's stuck in the mid two benches and he's getting flat out benched by just some dude that's bro bodybuilding and likes to max out his bench once a week. Because that guy will he'll work up to his maximum and then he'll rep out 225 and then he'll rep out 185 and then he'll go do a bunch of chest and shoulders and triceps. No, it's not a well intelligently structured program, but because one of the first and foremost things that we can do ourselves a favor in our early training career is try to set ourselves up to build cross-sectional area. And the bench seems to be uniquely responsive to this, maybe because it's a potentially bit lower skill motion when compared to something like a squat. The bigger the primary movers, generally the bigger the bencher. And that's why you'll see people with these intelligently well-structured programs that are being outperformed by people doing bro training. It's not just that the bro is a genetic freak. The bro very well might be natty. He's just training in such a way that he's going to be building cross-sectional area more effectively than that guy who specialized early. Now, if someone's way into their training career and they've built up about as much muscle as they can carry for their weight class or about as much muscle as they're going to carry as a natural athlete, then they can ramp up that specificity. And the fact that the bench press performed in this way isn't as stimulative hypertrophically is less of a problem. So I would view having our specificity too high too early. We're not going to develop primarily the hypertrophy foundation we're looking for. Now, that being said, this can be kind of misused. I think that some people will realize how much doing a bunch of accessory work can do for them, just getting bigger and stronger, and they start to lose sight of the fact that strength is a skill. And that brings us to the other end of the spectrum, where someone is actually quite advanced and quite strong, and they have not sufficiently ramped up their specificity. That's someone who identified early in their training career, hey, if I just build muscle, I get stronger. If I build muscle, I get stronger. My lifts are just a byproduct of how much muscle I have. Yes, that's part of the equation, but it's not the whole equation. And I probably fell below this curve at some point. So this was me. I identified how potent training like a bodybuilder to supplement my powerlifting was, but then I didn't downscale that percentage as I got more advanced. And strength ultimately is a skill. And then there were people with less muscle than me lifting more than me. And I was like, well, shit. And you see a lot of guys get really good. Really, really good because they tried really hard. They're genetic freaks. They're big people and they get ridiculous totals. There are people I've seen total like 2,100 with horribly low specificity just because they built up this insane machine. But then they failed to then begin capitalizing on what that machine is truly capable of by ramping up their specificity. So I would say that we can kind of find two areas of dysfunction on this curve. We can have our specificity maybe be a little bit too high, too early, instead of focusing on these general physical qualities of, okay, we're going to do lots of hypertrophy work. We probably want to do at least some kind of cardio and develop this big old work capacity. That'll be awesome. You could argue early in someone's training career, their training should look more like executing general fitness training to the highest degree possible. So there's some strength training, there's some conditioning, there's some plyos, right? There's some explosive power training. And then as we get more advanced and as we need to get better, that percentage of training that's ramped up by our actual sport specific goals is going to rise and rise and rise. And some people do fail to do that, myself being one of them. This did not turn out as well as I had planned it in my head. I'll probably give this a watch back, and if I think it turned out okay, I'll post it up. But this is something I do think that we should have in the back of our mind as our training career progresses. What worked for you in the past, being a more accessory-focused approach, is not necessarily what's going to work for you in the future. And so we should probably think, okay, well, where am I on this curve? Am I following this line? And if things are going well, you're probably following this line. The only thing I would say is just because our percentage of training is low, that dedicated to the specific motion is low initially, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be practicing the lifts kind of often. Because the two things we can do to set ourselves up for the most success possible early in our training career is putting on muscle mass and then also getting our technique pretty solid. Because solid technique isn't just, we don't call it good technique just because it looks pretty. It's called good technique because it's mechanically efficient. And when we follow the exact same progression scheme with this more mechanically efficient technique, we end with a higher 1RM. And that's something people don't really get. We can say, okay, well, training is just numbers. And if we don't look at the more subjective qualities of how we're moving and we're only looking at the numbers, people will be confused. They're like, well, I ran this progression scheme where I like touch and go with my benches with very minimal control, and it didn't result with a 1RM at the end. And then someone else with the exact same genetics could run that exact same progression scheme using a different technique, and it could yield a very good result. So there's something that's lost there when we think of something as only numbers in a spreadsheet. The way in which we execute things is going to determine the stimulus it has on our body and is going to then in turn affect the result, right? So one of the best things we can do early is kind of chase and hone in this mechanically efficient technique. So when we run these same progression schemes, we get a bolstered result. So we probably don't want to only be practicing our bench press once a week, even if we can get away with that really low frequency. We should probably practice it 2 times a week. Maybe 3 if we build into that. But again, it'll probably be only taking up a small percentage of our training. So that would be kind of the one thing I would kind of touch on there is early in our training career, we're trying to train for these broader physical qualities. We're kind of just being a bodybuilder. We're building this work capacity, but we also want to start establishing the skill of a good motor pattern for our competition movements, whether that be a clean and jerk and a snatch, whether that be a squat, bench, and deadlift, whether that be strongman movements. We do want to start establishing good motor technique early. There's no such thing as too early to start getting efficient. There's such a thing as too early to dedicate the whole of our training time to these motions that might not be the best developmental tools. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you. What's going on there? Bonus! Odie! Come here! Big boy! Odie boy! Otis, come here. Hi, buddy. Thank you. Thank you, handsome. Can you lie down? Can you lie down? Can you lie down? You lie down? Good boy.